Beginning transmission. This is the Chaos Community Broadcast, a show about failures and how to navigate complex socio-technical systems, so you can surf the chaos instead of succumbing to it. Now, for recording of this broadcast, as well as all of our previous broadcasts, go to a web browser of your choice and type in chaos.community. I'm your host, James Wickett.
And I'm your host, Casey Rosenthal.
Well, today we are joined by Cat Swetel. Now, Cat is known in the lean and agile communities and is a program chair for the Agile Alliance. And she's had a really successful career in tech as an engineering manager and in consulting, and most recently coming from Ticketmaster and Verica. Welcome to the show, Cat.
Thanks, James.
Hi, Kat. Welcome to the show. As I recall, you and I, we first met on a yacht somewhere off the Sunshine Coast, just north of Brisbane. I can't remember whose boat it was. Chris Hemsworth, David Thomas, one of those fine folks. And a few days later, I had the pleasure of catching your presentation about your work at Ticketmaster, where you framed up their 45-year-old VAX assembly platform with a CI/CD pipeline. Were there any side effects from your long-term vaccination?
Yes. Yeah, sure. Of course. But like all vaccinations, they were good effects.
What was your main takeaway from that presentation? If we were going to distill the work that you put into that 45-minute, hour-long presentation and distill it into a 30-second soundbite that somebody like James could understand, how would you do that?
I would say DevOps is not a mindset.
How does Vax fit into the DevOps mindset?
Casey, I literally just said DevOps is not a mindset.
She did just literally say that, Casey.
Okay, but if you were to have the frame of mind that was flavored DevOpsy, how would you apply that to working with a Vax system?
With the rise of agility, agile, we had this kind of explosion of the ability of organizations to metabolize new information from their surroundings, from the market. And DevOps is kind of an answer to that, to say like, hey, there's still maintenance that needs to be done within this system in order for us to keep up that metabolic rate. So like literally any organism, right? You're always in balance between metabolism and maintenance. And I think that DevOps kind of answered that explosion in the ability to metabolize new information and said like, hey, we have to continue to nurture these systems. And we have to do like the, social reproductive labor around these systems. And we can't just do the like purely productive, make a product type labor, right? Because then we like can't continue to run, maintain, and reproduce these systems.
In your yet to be published autobiography, Kat, you describe your leadership style as deeply feminist. My favorite poet wrote, "Feminism isn't about equality, it's about reprieve." You took a short break from tech. You moved on from Verica. You gave yourself a reprieve from working with people like James. And yet here you are back on the show talking to James. Why should we trust your brand of feminism, and how should we measure its depth?
Casey, I asked you not to put me in these questions. How many times have we talked about this? You keep doing this to me.
I think the question is valid. And I think you shouldn't trust my brand of feminism or anyone's brand of feminism. I think perhaps you should try to find your own, if that's possible.
You once asked me if I ever met Mary Parker Follett, sometimes referred to as the mother of modern management theory. I don't know if you recall that conversation. I actually have met her. I was traveling through the Northeast corridor with Otto Appelquist, an acquaintance of Joe Hill. and I was introduced to Mary in a meeting house. I believe it was a Quaker meeting house in Braintree. We had a short conversation. We didn't really get along because at the time Otto was pretty vociferous about putting down books and living a life of emotion, since books rarely inspire the people to take a stand and implement direct action. Of course, Otto never imagined a book like this. But anyway, Mary, she pioneered the focus on people as an object of study and management versus the operations research that was the rage at the time, Taylorism, scientific management, etc. And she published works on reciprocal relationships, coined terms like win-win and power with versus power over. Really set the stage for concepts like psychological safety in management, which hopefully the software engineering world recognizes as very important right now, and what we know now is knowledge work. There's very little in contemporary management theory that doesn't owe some foundational notion to her work. So my question is, given how much we owe to women in the field of management and understanding of leadership and knowledge work done well, why are men even?
Just stop there. Why are men even? Yeah, that's fine. To answer that question, I don't know. I have been trying to figure it out, but if you come across anything that answers that question, I'd be interested to read it.
Is there any way that we can recenter the conversation around white men to make them feel more comfortable, like they aren't somehow to blame for the failures in management in general, and particularly in software engineering?
Yes, I definitely think we can. Okay. So I think it might be difficult just because of the age that we're in, but I think it is possible. I think what would make it difficult is that we're kind of shifting globally into a digital era, right? So, oh, this is new and interesting and cool. And there's really not the same dependence on scarcity that there once was, right? Like things in digital place, things gain value when they're shared rather than when they're hoarded, right? So that can be really challenging for white men. So that's why we see things like NFTs and cryptocurrencies, where we can programmatically implement in digital place the scarcity that tends to make white men more comfortable. So there are options.
So you're anti-cyber tulip.
Yes, that's correct. Yeah. Yeah.
All right.
I do this thing where I like.
What is cyber tulip?
I believe he's like alluding to cryptocurrencies and NFTs.
Oh.
Where it's, yeah.
James, we should have you on the show someday to tell us all of your sad Bitcoin stories.
No, it's not that. I mean, no, I'm already on the show, but I don't want to be like a guest on the show. Verica has sponsored the Chaos Engineering book, which is Casey and Nora's book published by O'Reilly. Now, for a limited time, Verica is providing the full book in PDF form absolutely for free. Go to verica.io/book for your copy.
Kat, I noticed you've done a lot of work popularizing the notion of epistemic injustice, which I find ironic given that you work in the tech world, where people are obviously more rational, logical, and self-reflective than the common person. So shouldn't you be talking about epistemic justice, since we're surrounded by it in the field of tech?
Yeah, I'm so glad, but not surprised that you asked that question in the way that you did. Yeah.
I'm not surprised either.
I mean, all of us here on this call have done work in resilience and all of those things, right? And thought a lot about safety. And you know, how do we make a system more safer? Like, how do we become sensitized to the boundaries of safety? We want to look for not just where we cross that boundary, but where we have like near misses, right? And so that's like how we understand it. And I think it's the same thing with epistemic injustice. The injustice part is really important, right? Because we have to be really looking for all the ways that we're perpetrating acts of epistemic injustice against ourselves and against others. So I think it's really important, even if you believe that you are such a rational human being, you're quintessential rational man, that you are not doing that. I think it would be great if you could be sensitized to perhaps the very few occurrences around you or inside you.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that confirmation of my rationality. So, if we could focus in on one specific example for the benefit of the audience of testimonial injustice, for example, could you, does anything come to mind? I mean, if we could think of an example in software engineering, that would be great. But I obviously I expect it would be difficult to come up with an example of testimonial injustice happening in our field.
Oh, yes, certainly. So for you listeners, testimonial injustice is when there's something about me that causes you to kind of disregard the things that I know. And I can also do that to myself, right? I can think, oh, Kat, you don't have a CS degree, so surely you are just garbage at your job in technology, and you should not offer up whatever your thoughts are on that architecture or something, right? So that's me committing an act of testimonial injustice against myself. And you could also do that. Like one of my favorite examples of this is when I'm sitting in a room with some software vendors, and they are, trying to make their big pitch, and they're asking, it's a bunch of dudes, roughly half of them are in blue suits. And then there's us on the other side of the table. There's two women and then a bunch of dudes in hoodies. And the blue suits spend all of their time asking the hoodies, like, oh, do you need to do this? Do you need to do that? Blah, blah, all of these things. And then in the last 5 minutes, one of the hoodies says, hey, do you have any questions for the person who's going to decide if you get paid or not? And you see all of their faces just like drop and the color drains out. And he indicates the other woman in the room and says, well, she's the staff engineer that's going to decide if, the software that you're providing actually does the things that you say it does and whether you get paid or not. So then at that point, they had 5 minutes to ask her questions that's pretty clearly an instance of testimonial injustice, where they thought, surely these guys that look like fancy software top men, we should be asking them questions and not, the mom over there. Yeah.
That almost sounds specific enough to be a real world example.
Yes. Mm-hmm. It does, doesn't it?
Or do you have any advice for people like me as to how to dismantle that, the kinds of power structures that contribute to injustices in the software industry?
Yeah, I think number one, we can always be asking ourselves, am I just trying to re-implement the thing that I know that makes me comfortable, right? And it's okay if you can't think of anything else. That's when we make the journey to the epistemic margins and we invite stories from the folks who are currently living there, because that's where tons of knowledge lives, right? And tons of possibility. It's with the people who are currently very underserved by the current system, right? Even if they can't describe what it should be, they can describe the ways, hopefully, in which they're currently being underserved. However, that's not always even super easy, right? Because we all may be working with a really incomplete toolbox from a narrative perspective, right? When there's this dominant lived experience, like this is what it is to be in tech, this is what it is to like have your career progress, and this is what it is, right? And we have seen some of those things bubble up recently. It's like, why did you only stay at that job for 2 years or something, right? Well, for one set of people that are privileged in the system, that's probably a valid question. For everyone else, that's probably an invalid question, because there's a whole different narrative there about how you progress through your career and get to where you want to go. So the trouble there is that sometimes even if we're making the effort to go to the epistemic margins, we still, the people who are at the margins and the people who are more privileged by the system, we're all laboring with the same incomplete toolbox to try to understand each other. So we have to come together to generate a new set of narrative tools that can validate the lived experience of people at the margins. And really, like, that's a lot of what I feel like continuous verification is too, where it's kind of like, hey, I'm going out to you. I know that you have these feelings about the system, right? And like a lot of the times, nothing ever happens. You get that feeling, you're approaching the safety boundary there, and then something happens where it backs off, right? And so we have to go there and create a set of narrative tools to describe that and say, like, hey, yeah, that's a legitimate experience that you had of the system. And now let's create tooling that can help you validate that experience, right? So I think we don't do a good job of that socially, and then that is very much reflected in the actual technical systems that we create, that we're just not good at looking for experience that is different than whatever the dominant narrative is.
James, do we have anybody on the line for call-in questions?
Casey, we do have a caller. Let me bring in the first caller.
Hello. Long time caller. Who are you calling? The Justice League! Do you mind? You mean Wonder Woman? I'm on the phone. He's on the phone to the Justice League. I bet it's the Green Lantern. Do you mind? I'm trying to have a conversation here. Could be Robin. No, I bet it's Batman. Hang on, I'm trying to have a call. So are you calling the Justice League or not? Epistemic Justice League. What does that mean then? Look, if you just keep quiet for a moment, I might get to ask. Or the Silver Surfer. Oh, I give up. Cat, could you please explain the Epistemic Justice League?
Yes, I can explain the Epistemic Justice League. It is a really hilarious story that I've never told in a place where I'm being recorded. But a couple years ago, Simon Wardley was planning to do this like fireside chat with Dave Snowden. And he says, hey, Kat, do you want to be the moderator? And I said, no, even though I really did want to be the moderator. But I don't know if you know Dave Snowden, but he has like this handy dandy notebook, and he'll like write stuff in his notebook to prepare even for something like that. That's more like casual conversation, right? So I'm like, no, I know Snowden. I'm not going in his handy dandy notebook. And so it's like, maybe the day of, I can find a way to still be the moderator for the fireside chat, even without like letting anyone know. I'm like, if it happens, great. If it doesn't happen, great. So I did find a way to make that happen. I right away like raised my hand to ask a question in the fireside chat that was not moderated. And Simon called on me, and he was like, oh, come up here and ask. And I just took the microphone away from him and also took his chair. And they just brought another microphone and another chair. And I got to talk about how I think sense-making tools and tools like Wordly mapping, which are just accessible to people, right? Like Wordly mapping, anyone can go look up Wordly mapping. All the information is available to you. I think they're kind of like the antidote to the blue suit MBA, you don't know our magical quadrant thing. So we talked about epistemic injustice and epistemic justice, and we started the Epistemic Justice League right there on the stage.
On the spot.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Digital future we all hoped for when we were in our youths, for sure.
Yes, I'm still in my youth, though. Just
yeah. I mean, for Casey,
Right.
Yeah.
Well, Otto used to say the past didn't go anywhere, and look where it got him.
Okay. Well, Kat, it's been lovely having you on the show. Thank you for all the time today.
Thank you.
Anybody have any closing comments?
On Wednesdays, we wear pink.
Got it. Kat, I do appreciate it. And Casey, as always. And that concludes our show, folks. For a recording of this broadcast, as well as all of our previous broadcasts, please go to chaos.community in a web browser of your choosing. Ending transmission now.